Hey everyone, thanks for your time. This past week was the first working week of 2025, and there was some news on work on the 3 Artemis missions planned for the rest of the decade, Artemis II, III, and IV. Stacking of the Artemis II vehicle resumed, with exploration ground systems lining up the rest of the 10 SLS solid rocket booster motor segments for assembly in the Vehicle Assembly Building at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. In South Texas, SpaceX has the next Starship prototype ready to fly from Starbase in Boca Chica. That's crucial to the schedule for Artemis III, and EGS has also started assembly of the mobile Launcher-2 umbilical tower outside the VAB in Florida, which is crucial to the schedule for Artemis IV. In this video, I'll go over the status of that activity and go over what I was able to find out at last month's media event about the new Boeing facility in the VAB that they will use to finish SLS Core Stages in the future. There are some leftover news items and notes from New Year's to go over, and we can take a quick look ahead, so let's dig into those details. On January 3rd, SpaceX published a preview of the next Starship flight test, which will be the 7th in a little less than 2 years. This test will include a block of upgrades to the ship. Critical for Artemis III, the upgrades include capabilities necessary for eventual orbital flight testing. The preview notes some of those, like vacuum jacketing propellant feed system lines, which will reduce boil-off losses. The ability to fly longer missions should also enable orbital flights, though it's unclear what the endurance of the previous ship prototypes was and what it is for this next generation prototype. The preview published on the 3rd did not specify a launch date, but it did note that the same suborbital Earth once-around trajectory will be flown, and that another in-space Raptor restart demonstration is planned. The prime objectives of the test remain focused on rapid reusability of the system, so we may have to wait until after this test flight to see when the first orbital flight test is scheduled. Right now, the launch manifest for Starship development in 2025 remains undefined in public. On January 8th, that preview was revised to add a launch date target of the 13th, with a launch window that opens at 4 p.m. local or Central Standard Time, which is 2200 UTC. The update also included some event timings. In terms of events that occur post-insertion, the Raptor in-space restart demonstration would occur 37.5 minutes after liftoff, with the ship water landing occurring about 66 minutes after liftoff. As always, the NSF NASA Spaceflight.com crew is providing 24/7 live streams of work at Starbase, so the dedicated in-depth coverage of this flight test is there, and I'll continue to focus on the impacts of Starship development progress on Artemis III specifically and Artemis more generally. Related to Starship and Artemis III, a few details about the concept of operations for the initial Starship HLS lunar demonstrations were published in an application that SpaceX filed with the Federal Communications Commission, for FCC for short, in mid-December. The application and most of the documentation goes into the details of the communications equipment and configuration for Starship, but the technical annex begins with an overview of Starship HLS mission operations for Artemis III and IV. We already knew that the HLS variant would need to be refueled in Earth orbit, but this provides another layer of detail. The HLS Starship will first be refueled by a propellant depot Starship in low Earth orbit. That depot will be resupplied by waves of tanker Starships in a circular orbit said here to be at 281 kilometers altitude, plus or minus 100 kilometers. After the HLS variant is refueled in LEO, it will then transfer to what is referred to here as either a medium to high Earth orbit or as the final tanking orbit. That orbit would have an apogee of 34,534 kilometers, plus 116,000 kilometers minus 24,000 kilometers, and a perigee of 281 kilometers plus or minus 100. The HLS Starship will be refueled by another depot Starship in that higher final tanking orbit, in order to provide enough performance to fly from there to the gateway orbit, also known as a near rectilinear halo orbit, and then make a round trip from there to the surface of the Moon. During the year-end holiday break, the first outfitted Mobile Launcher-2 umbilical tower module was transported from an offline subassembly work site in the Kennedy Space Center industrial area up the road to the Launch Complex 39 East Park site. That move of module number 4 was on December 28th. Then, on January 3rd, that was lifted up and stacked on top of the chair structure that connects the mobile launcher base with the umbilical tower. That marked the quote-unquote rig and set milestone, where the umbilical tower structures are assembled on the mobile launcher's base and launch platform. The mobile launcher is not just a mobile launch platform, but also an active machine and base station for the spacecraft and rocket before it launches. These MLs supply all the services that SLS, Orion, and other payloads need in the vehicle assembly building and at Launch Pad 39B. From propellants to gases and other fluids, to electricity, to hydraulics, to data networking and communications. And it also provides access to the vehicle for ground support and flight crews. Outfitting and integration of all that connectivity is out in the future. Right now, the physical structure, which is partially outfitted, is under construction. As this diagram from a Bechtel presentation shows, the first outfitted module, Module 4, also had ER1 or Electrical Room 1 already added before it was shipped to the ML construction site. The next few tower modules will have similar subsystems already installed prior to their stacking with the rest of the tower. The last big picture forward outlook on Mobile Launcher 2 construction was in a NASA Office of Inspector General report last August. The targeted delivery date or work to date was November 2026, but the baseline scheduled date that NASA committed to for Congress was September 2027, which could be considered a risk-assessed style schedule date. At the media event last month, NASA's Exploration Ground Systems Program Manager, Sean Quinn, said to me that Bechtel and EGS were looking at topping out the umbilical tower somewhere around the middle of the year. That media event at Kennedy Space Center in mid-December was staged in High Bay 2 of the Vehicle Assembly Building. Boeing's new Core Stage Final Assembly facility in High Bay 2, officially called the Core Stage Vertical Integration Center, or CSVIC, towered over questions from media and responses from NASA and contractor officials at the event, and the Artemis II core stage had just recently been installed in the facility, but the tooling and platforms were not a central topic at the media event due to all the higher priority watch items for Artemis, like the Artemis II schedule and the now uncertain future of Artemis altogether. I was able to steal about 10 minutes of time with Boeing SLS engineering officials to ask some questions about the High Bay 2 facilities and try to better understand current and future operations. In this audio, I am talking to Stephen Ernst, a senior manager with Boeing. It's been 5 years since I last talked to him for any period of time, but he's been working on SLS engineering going back to interviews I did in 2016. One of the questions to start with was how the full core stage was anchored in the tooling. The social media post published at the time Core Stage 2, the unit for Artemis II, was installed, said that quad pods and vertical stabilization fixtures support the stage in the tooling, but didn't go into where or how. We know about quad pods because they've been used for engine section assembly and production, both at Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans over the past 5 years, and also in Boeing's engine section production area at KSC at the Space Systems Processing Facility, or SSPF. Are the quad pods kind of the same? I mean, same idea here on the bottom?
Same idea.
Same?
They're just
okay.
a beefier version of them.
Okay.
They actually interface with the engine section in the same location as
right.
the
and
original
then
set.
What were they? How is it attached at the top? Is it with on the SRB mounts?
No. So we've got two what we call vertical stabilization features. So there's two tools that are mounted to the upper deck of this that interface with the VSS fittings on the forward skirt. A little bit similar to how it's supported on the ML. There's a little picture of it over there on the tagboard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I hope I can get a shot of that. Because the VSS, those are not like perfectly 180 degrees. So
no,
is there something else you're
bracing
it on?
That's all we need. We just interface with those directly.
Huh. Interesting.
And that just provides a little lateral stability because we had to factor in wind loads in here just because it does get
but other than that,
inside.
So the quad pods could support the whole weight of the
Yeah, the new and improved quad pods.
Okay.
In fact, the Core Stage 3 engine section that's down in the SSPF has a set of the new quad pods on it. This is Unit 2 of the quad pods
Okay.
supporting the core stage.
The stage is supported in those same locations while stacked, but it is also importantly supported by the solid rocket booster attach points on either side of the inner tank. Those attach points are also on either end of the thrust beam of the stage. I asked about the covered area closest to the high bay doors, which are behind us from the point of view of this shot, but open and providing more outside daylight than during the media event.
So then this thing over here, is that elevator basically?
No,
or is it all?
That's fire-rated stair enclosure.
Okay. That's
So
but this,
the
you
whole
also
facility's high hazard, so we had to have fire-rated stairs, so they're 1 hour fire-rated. So it's emergency egress.
Okay,
You
I
can
gotcha.
use it, but it's intended for emergency egress.
Okay.
The facility was designed for final assembly of future core stage units, beginning with the next one. The fully integrated Core Stage-3 engine section subassembly will be set up in the tooling using those beefier quad pods. That will roll over from the SSPF a few miles down the road, but the upper 4 elements of the stage, called the 4/5, will be shipped from MAF as the other major subassembly. An engine section simulator will be attached to the bottom of the liquid hydrogen tank as a part of production of the 4/5. The forward skirt, liquid oxygen tank, and inner tank will be joined first, and then the liquid hydrogen tank and simulator will be connected to that. When that's ready for stacking with the engine section, that will be rolled out of MAF and onto NASA's Pegasus barge for transportation to KSC. When it gets into High Bay 2, it has a simulator bolted in the place where the engine section goes. So I asked about getting that simulator off.
When they bring the 4/5 in here, how you get off the simulator?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, we're actually, while we're suspended, we'll bring it down and work off of JLGs, and we'll offload a little bit of the weight just basically on the floor.
Okay.
Yeah, and then fly it up.
I also asked about future plans to set up another vertical cell in the High Bay 2 area.
Are there plans at some point to do another cell essentially for a second one?
It won't have the same capability as this one does,
Right.
but it does give us the ability to ultimately to put a core stage over here.
Okay.
Be right about.
Are you gonna
pretty much under right where you're standing?
Right.
Yeah.
Are you gonna lose the old ET platforms,
We're gonna
or
have to modify those.
okay?
Yeah.
But you're gonna use them.
A couple
All right.
reasons. One, we don't have enough hook height to get over the top of the old ET checkout cell, so we got to remove a few levels 3, and then either put a hole or replace the whole deck that you're seeing above you. But then we would reuse the core stage support plan. Well, a copy of it. Same thing we have over there, minus that engine integration platform we'd set up here.
Right.
So the tooling and platforms for a second vertical cell will support storage and some maintenance, but won't have all the features of the first cell that was just completed. When a unit is completed, it would be able to be moved to the second cell for storage, while another core stage could be completed in the first cell. The tooling and platforms that were just built and completed support both storage and test, as is being done with Core Stage 2 for a few months right now, but also assembly and production beginning with Core Stage 3. As Mr. Ernst said, the second cell wouldn't have features like the adjustable engine platforms that will be needed to install the 4 L3 Harris, formerly Aerojet Rocketdyne, RS-25 engines in the core stage. Mr. Ernst also provided some details about that too.
And we're actually going to use the original engine vertical installers, the leftover from the shuttle program, and they're at MAF now, but we'll use those to bring the engines from there over to here and then underneath the.
And then the engine platform is adjustable?
Yeah, it's got four fixed heights at the lowest position now, and the upper position is where it would be to bring the engines in.
So when you bring a vertical installer in, then do you have to get the platform out of the way, or does it interface with the platform?
When we take it in, the engine integration platform will be at the uppermost position.
Okay.
It gives us about a foot of clearance. We'll bring it in, and then this was all closely coordinated with Aerojet Rocketdyne to get those other two heights so that the technicians have the proper access for supporting the engine install.
While Core Stage 2 is set up in the High Bay 2 Vertical Integration Center, Boeing is coordinating with EGS and Amentum on what maintenance work they can perform while the stage is vertical there before it is needed to continue stacking the Artemis II vehicle. All of the work will be completed and closed out in High Bay 3 after stacking, but some of the jobs up for discussion in High Bay 2 include flash updates for the RS-25 engine controllers and some main propulsion system closeouts inside the forward skirt, inner tank, and engine section. In other news and notes, now that the year-end holiday break is over, Exploration Ground Systems and Amentum resume stacking of the Artemis II vehicle, which is still focused on assembly of the SLS solid rocket boosters on Mobile Launcher 1 in High Bay 3 of the VAB. During this past week, the first more or less full working week of 2025, one solid rocket motor segment was stacked and another was transported into the VAB transfer aisle in preparation for stacking that. The fourth of 10 motor segments, the right aft center segment, was lifted into place, and then the field joint between the tang end of that segment and the clevis end of the aft segment below it were mated. The next segment to be lifted is the left-hand center segment, and that was transferred from the Surge 2 building of the Rotation Processing and Surge facility to the VAB transfer aisle after operations with the right aft center segment were completed. After the remaining 6 segments are lifted into place and those field joints are mated, there is still work to do before the boosters are ready to be mated to the core stage. The boosters are topped out by the forward assemblies, which include most of the SRB avionics, which works with the SLS flight computers to begin the mission and steer the vehicle while the boosters are there. The steering systems themselves are down in the aft skirts, and all the hardline connections between the avionics at the top and bottom of the boosters also has to be connected and tested for connectivity. Those connections are a part of the firing chain between the vehicle and ground systems. The SLS flight software commits the vehicle to flight with the liftoff command, called Fire 2, and that liftoff signal has to make it from the vehicle into the mobile launcher launch-release system. So those connections will also start to get checked out after the pieces of the booster are all put together. The schedules will change throughout the year, but currently the forecast is that the boosters and the core stage will be ready to be mated in March. Those forward assemblies are due to be delivered to the VAB transfer aisle very soon from the booster fabrication facility to finish up maintenance and preparations for when it is their turn to be lifted into place. Actually, this item was published just before New Year's. This Axiom Space piece is a video slide deck, essentially, of some milestones for the Axiom EMU during 2024. It provides some detail, but we're still missing the context needed to place development on some kind of timeline. The next big milestone is completing the critical design review, and the Government Accounting Office report in the middle of last year noted that a human-in-the-loop vacuum chamber test was a requirement to close the CDR. Those are the Artemis III watch items for the lunar surface spacewalk suit. Another set of imagery was published in the last week or so showing activities that occurred at the beginning of the last quarter of 2024 in October. Stennis Space Center Public Affairs published pictures of ground support equipment installations in the B-2 test stand there. That is where the first flight exploration upper stage unit will be sent after assembly and production are complete. The Artemis IV EUS flight article will go through a Green Run test campaign that will help verify the design of the stage and provide some of the data needed to certify it to fly Artemis IV. The interstage simulator was lifted and installed in early October, and then support structures for the EUS umbilical connections were lifted into place at the end of that month. Pictures from the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans show preparations in late October to perform the internal wash and cleaning of the Core Stage-3 liquid oxygen tank. The tank was installed in Cell E inside Building 110 at MAF earlier that month, and these are the first pictures I'm aware of showing the wash probes being extended and deployed inside the tank. We can see in these pictures that the probes are lowered through the forward manhole and inside the tank. NASA Kennedy Space Center Public Affairs published a blog and time-lapse video on January 8th showing the return of the Orion environmental test article to the multi-payload processing facility in the KSC industrial area. The Artemis I crew module was outfitted with some test hardware to take the place of elements like the heat shield and forward bay cover in order to complete environmental testing at the Neil Armstrong Test Facility in Ohio during 2024. The test article arrived back at KSC just before Christmas, and it will now go through a reaction control system functional test in the MPPF. The blog notes that after the testing in the MPPF, the Orion test article will go through additional acoustic testing in the SSPF. We're only about a week away from the transition of power here in the U.S. to President Trump. There's a lot of gossip about what's going to happen all across the executive branch and across the government, but there was one story specifically about the NASA transition by Tim Fernholz in Payload that enumerated the people on the transition team. We may have to wait until after Inauguration Day on January 20th to get more details about what the new administration has planned. But as the story notes, the background of the people on the team at least aligns with the existing speculative narratives that the government-operated and fully government-funded programs could be targets for termination. The 119th Congress was sworn in on January 3rd, and Senator Ted Cruz is now the chairman of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. That is a committee that will hold a confirmation hearing for NASA Administrator nominee Jared Isaacman. It's possible that Mr. Isaacman will meet with some senators beforehand, but that might not be necessary. The next order of business, or the first order of business, is when that confirmation hearing will be scheduled. As that gets closer, here's a quick look at where things stand for Artemis II and III in particular as 2025 begins. For Artemis II, the tentative outlook laid out last month at the media event focused on SLS stacking milestones with Orion activity to be determined and to be eventually announced, hopefully. The SLS boosters were projected to be stacked and ready to mate to the core stage in March. The rest of the launch vehicle minus its Orion connector would be in place perhaps in mid-April, and then EGS would check out all the interconnections between the boosters, stages, mobile launcher, and launch control systems into the middle of the year. Somewhere out beyond that would be a tanking test campaign out at Launch Pad 39B. The overall schedule is driven by when Orion will be ready to stack on SLS, and the NASA Exploration Directorate wants to work towards being ready to launch Artemis II by the end of the year. But the target date is still April 2026. How close EGS, Orion, and SLS can get to the front end of that timeline will depend on how smoothly things go with the SLS stacking, the tanking test, and particularly Orion launch processing. If Orion were ready to stack in early fall at the beginning of the last quarter of the year, then maybe we could be talking about a launch period by this time next year. If there are lessons to be learned from stacking or the tanking test, or Orion is ready to stack closer to the end of this year, then April 2026 fits that better. That's what we'll be watching all year for Artemis II. For Artemis III, these watch items don't change that often because the outlook remains cloudy. We did get a little bit of insight into the Artemis III SLS production forecast and what to look for during the first half of 2025. But the Starship schedule is secret, and Orion is reworking theirs after the recent decisions and action items after the base heat shield investigation. We'll be looking for any schedule updates on when key tests will occur for Starship and the Axiom EMU, or Extravehicular Mobility Unit. The target launch date for Artemis III is now mid-2027, but the critical design review for both Starship HLS and the Axiom EMU are still scheduled to be completed this year in 2025. I'll continue to look for any updates on development milestones for those programs and tracking production milestones for Orion and SLS. Thanks for watching. Click on the like button if you found this video informative.